Hello, tech interview candidates. Welcome to this video tech interview cheat sheet. We will learn how to ace in the tech interview. Let's get started. At first, we'll talk about what are the 10 steps you should follow in the actual tech interview. The first step, you want to rephrase the question to make sure you understand the actual problem. Then you should ask enough clarifying questions, at least 3, I would suggest. Then write at least 3 unit tests, like input-output test cases. And you should focus on the S cases here when you are writing input and output test cases. Then you want to find a dumb-based solution possible, like a brute force method, in 3 minutes. If you can't figure out how to do it in brute force method, that means you are not ready for tech interview yet. And if you can't figure it out, ask for a hint from the interviewer. Interviewer is there to help you in the process. If you can find a solution, think about how you can optimize the solution. 90% of the time, it will be a time and space trade-off. You want to store something so that actually you can speed up the process of runtime complexity. When you are doing that, thinking out loud, explain your algorithms. And if the interviewer doesn't have any objection, ask if you can start coding. And when you are start coding, code in your preferred language. So that's really important because you need to know all the related data structure and useful libraries in that preferred language. When you are done with your coding, manually test your code using the test case you wrote in step 3. If there is any bug, try to fix it, then dive deep into the run time and space type complexity, what we discussed in step 5. And let the interviewer know when you are done, anything you should try to improve or optimize. So these are the 10 steps you should follow in the actual tech interview. And we will go into an example to see how we can use these steps in the process. So let's talk about a famous problem, two-sum problem. If you go to LeetCode, you will find this problem is number 1, and its difficulty level is easy. Although it's an easy problem, I see a lot of the times the interviewee make silly mistakes when they are solving this problem. And the problem says, given an array of integer nums and an integer target, return indices of the two numbers such that they add up to target. Bear in mind that interviewer might be vague about the questions, so he might just only tell you that first sentence, right? If you look into the LeetCode, you will see there are a few more information are there. Like you may assume that each input would have exactly one solution, and you may not use the same element twice, and you can return the answer in any order. So the highlighted text might not be presented by the interviewer when you are in the interview. And basically the input is numbers array with 2, 7, 11, and 15, and target is 9. And we want to find out the indices of two numbers. If you sum those two numbers, that becomes 9. So you can find 2 and 7, and those indices are 0 and 1. So basically for this input nums array and target 9, you want to return 0 and 1. So that's the problem. So let's go through each step by step to figure out how we should approach this problem. So step 1, you need to rephrase the question. Just to make sure you understand the problem, what are the inputs? You can say, what are the inputs? I'm assuming there's an array of integers and the target integers. And what would be the output? Array of indices, right? So make sure you understand the problem, because sometimes I saw the candidate actually try to return the actual number, not the indices, right? And also think about other things when you are asking these questions. And we'll go into detail. So go to next step 2. you should ask clarifying questions, because that's the most important part. Although it's a very easy solution, don't jump into coding, because the interviewer might have totally different thing in mind, right? And as a rule of thumb, I always say that ask at least 3 questions, then you will get some sort of idea how to approach the problem. So the question you might even ask, what is the size of the input array, right? So do you have hundreds of numbers? Do you have millions of numbers? How many numbers are there? Maximum value inside the array, right? Are they all positive or negative? Because these are the key information which will help you to optimize your solution later. Maximum value is important because if your one of the number is maximum integer and then you want to sum up with other number, then actually the result might overflow, right? Think about those edge cases. And what about the target variable? So you can ask them actually, is it a fixed, or actually will it be changed for multiple input configuration, right? Because if it's a 0, then you know actually there's another variation of this to some problem, right? And in that case, if you have a positive number, you need to have corresponding negative number in the array to make it 0 as the sum. Will the input have multiple solutions, right? Because what might happen actually, you might have 3 or 4 different pairs which add up to the target. What will you do in that case? Can you use the same element multiple times? So we'll see an example in the input-output test cases. And would the output need to be in a specific order, right? So both for the case of indices and also the list of indices. If you have 3 possible pairs as the result, then actually each of the number inside the pair needs to be specific order, right? And for some question, if you don't have any idea what are the questions to ask, think about this pro tip, right? Think about the user who will use your system, or who will use this function. What is the size, and also what about the data, right? So these are some cue you can think about if you need to ask any specific clarifying questions. Let's go to the step 3, write down some test cases, right? So I would assume write down at least 3 and think about the edge cases first, right? So as you can see, my first input test case is an empty array with a target any variable, and try to figure out what would be the output. So if you are given an empty array, you want to sum those 2 numbers to x, and output will be an empty array. What will happen actually, so if you have 2, 5, 4, 5 and target is 9, and you can see you can add 5 and 4, it becomes 9, so the result would be 1 and 2. But if you are allowed to use one number twice, same as like 4, which is in this location, then you would be able to get another answer, 2 and 3. So it's always based on what the problem asks for you to solve, right? If you can use one number multiple times, then your result will have multiple pairs. And finally, this is the input test case what were given in the lead code problem, 2, 7, 11, 15, and target is 9, and you should return 0 and 1, right? So when you are writing test cases, think about the S case, because these will help you a lot. Because when you are nervous writing coding or finding a bug, then these input and output test cases will help you to figure out to test your code later. Step 4. What is the brute force method to solve this problem, right? So if you can't figure out the brute force method, then you need to think deep. And you always should try to think about in 3 minutes, right? So you don't spend too much time on the brute force method. But at the end of the day, if you can't figure out any sort of solution, if you can at least come up with a brute force solution and code it up, you will get few points in the interview, right? So for this problem, what are the brute force method, right? So you have n numbers. You can find all the pairs. That will be n choose 2, which is order of n square. Sum all the pairs and check that actually it is equal to target or not, right? So runtime complexity is order n square due to there are n choose 2 pairs, and space complexity is constant because you are just add a sum variable, right? So pro tip, when you are practicing, try solving problems in dumbest way possible, right? Because which will give you some valuable insight about approaching problem in an interview, right? So I did a lot of the times, I try to implement all the common algorithm like sorting and searching, try to solve the problem how you do it by hand on pen and paper, right? Because that will give you the idea, oh, these are the things I can optimize, right? And this will also good for idea generation during the interview, right? So yeah, we can do an brute force method, and you can explain this process or algorithm to the interviewer and say that actually order n square runtime complexity. Now let's talk about step 5, right? What to optimize? Do you want to optimize time? Do you want to optimize the space, right? So most of the cases, I would say almost 90% of the cases, you need to optimize runtime complexity using some sort of intermediate or previously calculated results from memory, right? So you want to store something, some intermediate results, so that you can use it next time, so that your runtime complexity sped up, right? And if you can find the time complexity order n squared, think about, can you come up with an algorithm with order n log n or even order n, right? So from the quadratic runtime, you want to go into the linear runtime, right? And space complexity for the brute force method was constant. So most likely it will go to either order log n or order n, right? It will go up. So for this problem, can I store something in this problem, right? So what are the numbers I have seen? If I'm going through all the pairs, if I find only the first pair, is there any way I can store the value, right? And you need to be very careful about data structure here, because if you want to store something into your data structure as cache, can you retrieve it efficiently in order one time, right? Although it will be the average case. Because if you can't retrieve it in order one time, that will not help, right? Because then it will be again order n square. And now step 6, thinking out loud, right? This is the hardest part in the interview, because you want to explain your thought process, right? What are you thinking? What are the trade-off analysis you are trying to do? What are the things you are making assumption? What are the things you should not consider, right? So talk about your data structure. What will you use in your coding? And most of the time it will be a language specific thing, right? So that's why make sure you write code in your preferred language where you know all the data structure implementation or actually all the related libraries, right? So if you are using Java, then hash map might be a good choice, like a key value pair, right? You can retrieve all those things into constant time in average case. If you are doing in Python, you can use dictionary, which is also a key value pair, and you can retrieve it order one, right, time. So if you don't need the value, you just only need the key, you can even use actually dictionary in Python, right? But dictionary implementation, you can use set, which is similar to dictionary because you can retrieve it out of n. But make sure you don't use list, right? Or any other collection framework, which actually doesn't retrieve the value in constant time, right? And for C++, look into the data structure of what is more appropriate in this use case, right? And pro tip here for this step, here is your option to show off your data structure and language skills, right? That you explain all the data structure in the specific language you are coding, and also show them actually what are the libraries you know already, right? So that's where you can brag a little bit and show off that, oh, I know these things, how it works here, right? Let's talk about step 7. Now you want to write clean code. So make sure your code is properly indented, and also try to write as less lines as possible. If it's not necessary, don't try to write it up in your coding. And then focus on, you don't need to write any comment, but if you want to just write the pseudocode first, then you can just do some sort of commenting, right? But otherwise you might not need it, right? So this is one example written in Python, right? It's a function toSum, which takes two input like nums and target. And we are storing as an dictionary, as a scene dictionary. We are enumerating all the numbers like index and numbers. I is the index and n is the number. What we are basically doing, we are trying to find the difference, right? So target minus n. So if you already seen this d before, then you basically want to just return from that scene d and this I index, right? And if you didn't see it before, then actually you want to store this into the dictionary. So you want to store the number scene n of I, right? So look into the code. This is actually the simplest code you can write in Python for this problem, which is readable. And then most likely these will solve the problem for the lead code, right? So now the next step, right? Another important step, right? Verification step, right? So this is really important because you wrote few test cases in step 3, right? You want to manually test all of your input and output test cases using your code, right? So will your code pass all the test cases you wrote in step 3? Most likely not, right? So now think about what did you mess up in the coding, right? Did you forget an S case, right? So it might be a null pointer exception. It might be an empty array, right? All negative data. What will happen in that case, right? Are all of your array indices correctly calculated, right? So do you have any one-off error, right? So is any of the variable, how you are traversing the array is calculating starting and end location are in the correct order, right? Did you return correct value, right? So for this problem, so if I go back to here, you can see actually for this problem, if I go back, if there is exactly one solution might help you, but if I go back to the input output test case for the empty array, so just think about what will happen for this empty array, right? So for this empty array, your scene will be like empty dictionary. You will not going through in this loop, and you are not returning anything outside of this for loop. So basically it will not return anything. But if you have exactly one solution, you are guaranteed to go through this return line, right? So this is the buggy code. If you have multiple solutions, this will not work. But for this lead code problem, since there is an exactly one solution, fortunately that will work, right? So try to figure out what are the use case or actually how it doesn't solve the problem. Now, another important part, step 9, this is a bug fix. So if you find a bug, what will you do, right? So first thing, take a deep breath, right? At least for 3 seconds, right? And calm down before fixing any bug in your own code, right? Because that's the hardest part, right? Because you are in a time crunch, you have very limited amount of time, and you find a bug, how will you solve it, right? So make sure when you are updating only the relevant part of the code. Don't touch the other part of the code where the variable was not updated, right? Don't introduce any new bug while fixing the old one. That's like a cliche, right? So, but it's always happens because if you're trying to fix one bug, you might introduce new bugs, right? And remember to check all the test cases again, right? So fixing one test case might break the other test case, right? So that's why I cannot stress enough to actually write down that input-output combination. That will really help you a lot later when you are going through these steps, right? And explain your runtime and space complexity by going through block by block, right? So how you can go through, right? So if this is your code, just you can explain something like, oh, I'm declaring this scene variant dictionary here, which is order 1. I'm going through this for loop block of this for loop, which is running order n. So I will have order n, right? So you can easily see that the scene, this dictionary in the worst case might have order n number, right? So your scene dictionary will have order n space. This for loop will have order n runtime complexity. So yeah, going through the block by block and explain actually your runtime and space complexity, right? Because sometimes when you go through the code, you will figure out that actually, oh, you didn't think about what would be the extra runtime complexity. Are you going through the loop twice? Do you have multiple loops, right? So do you have any nested loop? Because that might actually make your code order n square, right? So the brute force method, when you are going through all the pairs, you need nested loop. So for loop inside another for loop, right? So which will make it order n square. But for these algorithm, we didn't need another nested loop. So that's order n, right? Step 10, right? Improvement and optimize, right? So ask the interviewer if he or she has any other insight about the problem. If the interviewer is thinking about other part of the problem which need to be improved, right? Listen to the suggestion and feedback interviewer provide, because this is really important, because try to think about what are the steps is going through the interviewer's mind too, right? And any special case you need to consider, right? Do you need to deploy it in any special environment, right? So does it need to be distributed? Those kind of scenarios, right? And pro tip, practice, practice, and practice. You need to do a lot of practice, because if you don't practice well, you will not be able to pass technical interview. Because the main reason to weed out all these interviewee in the tech screening, the main reason is that actually, did you practice a lot? Do you actually code a lot in your day-to-day life? And you need to become a pro in complexity analysis, right? When you are calculating runtime complexity and space complexity, if you make a blunder during the analysis, that's a huge red flag, because if you don't know what's the order n square, order n cube, and order n algorithm, and even if you wrote order n algorithm, but if mistakenly you are saying, oh, this is order n square algorithm, that's a huge red flag, because you might not be able to actually get a strong yes vote from the interviewer, right? That's all for this insightful session, right? So if you want to know more, you can follow me in LinkedIn. And there are a few videos you can look into all the process, how to solve lead code problems in the YouTube playlist. And thanks for watching.